Hello and welcome. I'm Reverend Wilma Wake with the online Swedenborgian community. This is July 25th, 2010, and the topic of my message today is poems and prayer. Have you ever felt that what you needed to say to God could best be expressed in a poem? Or have you ever found that a poem expressed what you wanted to say to God better than any prayer you had? Well, throughout history, poems and prayers have overlapped for people. Swedenborg says that prayer is a way of talking to God, and for many people, poetry is a particularly profound way of talking to God. The subject of our worship this year, that microphone just dropped. The subject of our worship this year is worship in the arts. And our question for today is, to what extent can we use poetry as a way to worship God, as a form of prayer to God? Well, I'd like to explore this with you by reading you two poems that were written by poets that were influenced by Emanuel Swedenborg in some way. I'm going to be reading from the volume Emanuel Swedenborg, A Continuing Vision, published some years ago by the Foundation and filled with wonderful articles about Swedenborg and his influence. I particularly appreciate the contributions of Alice Skinner in this volume. She has collected poems from a great many poets who were influenced in some way by Emanuel Swedenborg. And here's what she says. In her article in here on poets with Swedenborgian connections, she says, some poets, like Edwin Markham, were about Swedenborgians who advertised the connection. Others were related to Swedenborgians and learned Swedenborgian ideas through them. Robert Frost, for example, was baptized and went to Sunday school in the San Francisco Swedenborgian church, with which his mother was affiliated. She goes on to say that a lot of people may feel that the poems themselves aren't able to express some theological concepts in great complexity. However, she says that the poet muses on the totality of experience, and from it wrestles a singular expression, fresh minted words in poetic form, which have the potential of transforming responses in others. So she says that perhaps readers can find that this poetry will refresh their understanding of Swedenborgian perspectives by being an opportunity to reflect on the poetry of writers connected with Swedenborg. The first poet I'm going to read from today is Alice Berry, B-E-R-Y. She lived from 1894 to 1977. She was baptized and brought up in Swedenborgian churches in Providence and Boston. In later years, she was active in a Christian Science church. Her last book of poetry was called Write on the Water, published in 1972, and it describes the influence of her father, Professor Frank W. Berry, a noted interpreter of Swedenborg's science. So she was certainly impacted by Swedenborg. The poem of hers that I'm going to read is in the final section of poems in this volume, and it's in the section that Alice Skinner calls devotional verse. This one is called, Whom Have I But Thee? As I read this poem, I encourage you to just relax and listen, and try to listen with your heart, and allow this poem to be for you a prayer. Whom have I but thee? Have you any joy but of God's bestowing? Have you any refuge but in him? Though the world destroy, does not he remain? Can he who gave the seed forget his children's need? Sow in vain? Oh, be still, be patient, learn to pray, and wait for wisdom, knowing nothing can stop the seed from growing. Nothing of men's devising can stop the sun from rising, hinder its course or speed. Let him, uncompromising, lead each in his own way, till in the dawn's first whitening, the truth bursts forth like lightning, brings day. Amen. The next poem that I'm going to read, and the last poem today, is written by Carolyn A. Blackmer. She lived from 1899 to 1972, and she was an educator who sometimes wrote poetry, and she taught in Swedenborgian institutions, and there's quite a bit of information about her in the archives of the school in Berkeley and in Urbana University in Urbana, Ohio. Her poem is a very uniquely Swedenborgian poem, prayer, because it's focused on her experience of reading the Word. This is, for her, as it was for Swedenborg, a form of worship, and it moves her very deeply, and that's what this poem is about. It's called On Reading the Word. Daily, as I read, a familiar phrase will suddenly drop deep as into a well of stored rain, resound with new meaning as it strikes the quiet tension of my listening mind, and send out from its plumbed depths concentric circles, degree outreaching degree of pulsing, vibrant life. The outmost reflected back to its origin by the very stony walling in of my limitations. Then it lies still again, no sign of change. But from henceforth, my spirit will be lifted to a new level, almost imperceptibly. Amen. I invite you to open your heart to the experience of poetry as prayer, and as your prayers being given as poems. Many blessings to you as you explore this further in your own